One of the things I love about the forum at sixstringcountry.com is that you really get a glimpse into what people struggle with on the guitar. And this is something that's come up a lot, and that is the difference between the diatonic and the pentatonic scale and when we would use each of those scales. So you have to start with being able to learn the scales, learn positions 1 through 7 of the diatonic, learn positions 1 through 5 of the pentatonic, and be able to regurgitate them and play them back and hopefully have them memorized. But then this lesson is more going to be about how do we go about using that knowledge in a useful, in a musical way in our playing. So we're going to start by just talking about the very basic difference of diatonic and pentatonic scales. And for some of you that might be enough, but then for those of you that want to go a little deeper, we'll talk about some real life situations and some practical uses of each. So at its most basic level, the diatonic scale has 7 notes in it, okay? And that repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. That's position 1 of the diatonic scale. The pentatonic scale has 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. The pentatonic scale is really its own thing, but we can look at how these relate to each other because there's an easy way to see the relationship. And for that, we're going to start with a diatonic scale, a 7-note scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. That's a diatonic G scale. Okay, this is a G scale. Diatonic is basically synonymous with a major scale. So this is a G major scale, a G diatonic scale. Scale degrees, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. The pentatonic overlaid with the same position on the fretboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. So you've probably noticed by now we're just skipping these 2 notes. We're skipping back to the diatonic numbering. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. We skip the 4th degree. We skip the 7th degree. 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to skip that. So if we're talking G major diatonic scale, we'd hit the 5th degree, 6th degree, and back to the 1st degree. And then we're playing the same notes as the diatonic. So basically, if we're thinking of the diatonic scale, we omit the 4th degree and the 7th degree, and that gets us our pentatonic scale. Okay, so at its most basic level, that is how we make, or how we can think about one way to make the pentatonic scale. We can think about a diatonic scale and just leave out the 4th and the 7th degree. So now is where we're going to get a little bit more into when we might want to play a diatonic scale and when we'd opt for the pentatonic scale. So let's start by going through just a brief explanation of the diatonic scale. The major scale is built up of a certain pattern that always works. So in G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What if instead of going horizontally across the fretboard, we went vertically and went up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A major scale is always starting with the first. We go up a whole step. A whole step on the guitar is 2 frets, and a half step is 1 fret, right? So we start with the first note. It's a G scale. We're starting on a G note. We're going to go up a whole, another whole, a half, a whole, 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 half. Okay, so we start on the root. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. As we get into more of this guitar theory stuff, eventually we'll realize it all builds on each other, right? One of the most basic things, if you really want to understand what's going on the guitar neck, is you have to be able to name every one of these notes. What I mean by that is you have to know that this is a G note. That's an F note. Or if you wanted to find D notes, you could go D, 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 D. If you wanted to find C sharps, you could play one there, you could play one there, you could play one there. So you have to be able to name all of these string and fret combinations eventually, okay? Not that you have to know that to understand this tutorial, but that is a basic building block, because then with what we just talked about, root, then we have whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. To make these nicely laid out scale positions, so position 1 diatonic is just laying what we just laid out. Instead of going vertically up the neck on the same string, we're just laying that out across the strings, and we can do that by naming the notes. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And it keeps going all the way up. You want to play at a different position. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. How about here? G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. F sharp, G. So there's a million different ways to play these scales. We learn the patterns because they lay out nice for us as guitar players. And when we're soloing, it lets us go up and down the neck kind of fluidly, and it gives us these mental shortcuts. But those are just mental shortcuts. Anything that's in those notes on this scale make up the G diatonic scale, and they're all really fair game. So why would we not just use the pentatonic or the diatonic scale instead of the pentatonic scale if we're just taking notes out? And that's a good and a fair question, and that's what we're kind of getting at when we get into this tutorial. And the reason is because these notes, the C, go back here. You know, if we wanted to make that pentatonic, we'd omit the 4th scale degree and the 7th, which is a C and an F sharp. These are pretty colorful notes, and they're the half steps, right? This goes a half step to G, and this goes a half step to B, and they rub. So say we're in a diatonic progression. Let's just get this going here. I'm going to just go a G to a C. So what I mean by a diatonic progression is all the notes in the chords we're playing are part of the G scale. So if I'm playing a G chord, all of these notes are either G's, D's, or B's. Like that's a G note, that's a D note, that's a G note, right? So this is a G chord because they're all G's, B's, and D's. And this is a C chord because these are all C notes, G notes, and E notes. C is the root, then we have an E up here, which is the 3rd, and the G is the 5th. Okay, so all of the notes that I just named, G's, B's, D's, C's, E's, and G's, that make up these chords are in the G diatonic scale. So that's why this is a diatonic progression, because all the chords we're using, the notes that make up those chords, are all within one diatonic major scale. They're all within the G scale. So when we're doing a diatonic progression like this, let's get it down here. Here we go. I'm just going to use my loop here. And then we'll move up to a C chord. Okay. When we're doing this, the diatonic scale works pretty well. This is position 3 diatonic. Right? Let's do position 1. Okay? Now what about this though? We're going to go let it pass one more time here. When we get back to the G, I'm going to play something and we'll see how it sounds. Alright, how does this riff sound? Getting back to the G right here. Didn't sound great, right? And that's one of the reasons the diatonic scale can be a little more dangerous than the pentatonic, because if you got a rhythm guitar player really laying into a G chord and got this B note ringing out and this B note ringing out, and you're sitting on the diatonic scale and you end a phrase on this C note, then all of a sudden you got, how's that sound? Not real good, right? So with the diatonic scale, you've got these extra notes in there that can rub which is okay. It can add a lot of color too. However, you just have to pay more attention so that if the band's playing on a G note, you're going to want to end on really, you know, certainly a G, a B, or a D note would be safe, but a C note is probably not going to be a great place to end a phrase. You could end on a F sharp. You could go, let's get one in here. All right, so here we're going to get back to the G, and I'll end on an F sharp. All right, that's not, it's colorful, and it's depending on the song, that may not be what you're going for, but it could be nice. But all I'm getting at is when you're adding these extra notes in the diatonic scale, you just have to be more intentional about where you're certainly ending your phrasing and what chord the band is on. Like if you're on a C chord, if you ended on, again, that F sharp note, that's really going to clash with this G. And it can add some cool texture. It depends on what you're going for. It just takes more intentionality. So what we're talking about here is what I've been calling skating over the top, right? So we're not necessarily addressing each individual chord change, but like we were just talking about, you gotta kind of be thinking about it a little bit more, and not necessarily only addressing that chord change, but just paying enough attention to know that certain chords you could land on a note that's gonna rub and not be what you're trying to sound like. Whereas if you stayed in the pentatonic, there's really very little you can do to mess it up. Let's try that. Let's just stay in G pentatonic. I'll start position 3. All right, it's just safer. Now you're missing some of the colorful tones. That one, sorry, not that. You're missing that note and you're missing that note. But it's safe, right? Okay, so I hope that's starting to make sense. There's not a right or a wrong thing. If someone's playing a diatonic progression, it's not wrong to play the pentatonic scale over it, and it's not wrong to play the diatonic. It just requires a little bit different thinking, depending on what you're doing. Now let's talk about non-diatonic progression. So a good example of that is a blues progression where, say you're in E blues, you're not playing only notes in the key of E major, the E diatonic scale, right? So let's just get a blues progression going down here. 1, 2, start here. All right, so we've got this non-diatonic progression. We've got E7s and A7s, so we've got notes that aren't in the key of E major. So what happens if I try to play an E major scale over it? That sounds bad, right? That's because there's a lot of clashing going on. Now let's say, okay, but if we're in E blues, we want to play E minor. So what if we played E natural minor, which is the same as saying G major diatonic? Well, let's try it. Try position 3. Not terrible, but to me, unless you're going for that, again, the problems are those fourths, the C's, and the F sharps in that scale. Those get in the way and they can clash and they don't really sound great. Whereas if you just stuck to the pentatonic, okay, that just sounds better. If you're skating over the top, that just sounds better because you're omitting a couple of those scale degrees in the diatonic scale that can really clash with what's going on in a non-diatonic progression, especially. Now, if you get a little bit more advanced in your soloing and you can start addressing individual chord changes instead of skating over the top like we were doing just there, then what we've talked about a little bit in some other lessons with modes of the diatonic scale can come in really handy. Like, for example, if I and I don't want to get too advanced here, but let's turn that back on. You could use a E mixolydian scale, which is this. a different sound to it, right? But it's not necessarily bad. And when you start getting into some real advanced jazz chord progressions and that kind of thing, where you have to address every single change individually, then you really need to start looking at modes and how they relate back to those chord progressions. But for our purposes, basically, to summarize, when you're in a diatonic progression, you can use the diatonic scale, and it adds a lot of color. You just have to be a little bit more intentional with your phrasing so that you're ending on notes that aren't going to clash. Because when you're playing the diatonic scale as opposed to the pentatonic, you're adding in the 4th scale degree and that 7th scale degree. And when you're playing non-diatonic progressions, unless you're going to address every individual chord change, if you're just going to skate over the top, you typically want to stay with the pentatonic scale.